My name is Margaret Graziano, and I'm the president and founder of Keen Alignment. We've been working with organizations for the last decade on supporting them in moving from friction to flow. Today, I'm going to talk to you about response agility, and that is what we as consultants deliver when we go into organizations that want to thrive through change. So what is response agility? Response agility is a way of being. It's a distinction. It's a philosophy that really the person that is deploying it says, I don't want to be in friction. I don't want to be having misery or frustration or anger. I want to feel better. I want to love myself and my life at work. I don't want it to be like this complete opposite of my regular life. So today, we're going to talk about how to move from friction to flow, specifically at work, but really in any area of life that's important to you. In any area of life that's important to you, like family, like finances, like health and fitness, relationships, and work, let's face it, pays for all those things so that we can have a lifestyle and a life we love. So also apply response agility to how can you spend more time in the zone at work. So here we go. This is me when I was 7, just about turning 7 years old. You see, I wasn't exactly born in a war zone, but a war zone came to my home in about 1970, 1971. I grew up in a family that was Italian American, and everything seemed perfect. My dad, my mom, she looked like a mixture of I Dream a Genie and Bewitched, which, if you're from the 70s, you know what that is. If you don't, just Google it and you'll find it. And she was always there for us and cooking, and it was like the ideal family. And my dad was a plumber. He was a really hard worker, and we always had a really full refrigerator, and we had a swimming pool outside for the summer and a snowmobile for the winter. And he was like that kind of dad. But in 1971, he reverted back to his heroin addiction. And my mom was not prepared for that to happen. They had 5 kids. They had a lot of drama in their life. They lost 2 children. And her way of coping is she moved to a higher power, God, Jesus. His way of coping is he moved to heroin, which, by the way, was his childhood addiction. He was 14 the first time someone gave him heroin. My cousins say, I want you to know, my mom says, your dad never had a chance. Me, as a child at 7 years old, going from perfection family to war zone, and an addict in the house who you never knew what you were going to get. And then the mom loved him so much. They met at 16. They had made 7 children together. She was in denial about the heroin addiction. So this little girl, which was me, grew up in a state of terror, never knowing what was going to happen, who he was going to hit, who he was going to throw through a window, who he would almost kill, literally. And I'm not kidding about that. And then having to make believe everything was okay the next day when it was business back to normal. Well, I didn't stay a kid. I grew up to be a teenager and then a young mom at 19 years old. And you could see I was a little bit in a state of friction here. I was married to a person, which my past altered the way I see things. Kid from a war zone, sees the world as a war zone, makes choices like somebody out of a war zone. And I chose to get myself pregnant at 19 years old. And then I chose to marry the person who I didn't want to marry. And then I chose to shift it. And I moved to flow. I married the guy, I got pregnant. He had 22 jobs in 1 year. He couldn't make a living. My greatest fear as a kid, being in this disruptive household, was that I would wind up on the street. We would be poor, and we would have nothing. And that fear I carried with me to being a young mother. And I was petrified that if I stayed married to this guy, me and this little guy, David, would be on the street. I had a choice. I was working as a straight commission recruiter, and my choice was, I got it in the mail. It said, you haven't gotten child support. You should go to Aid for Dependent Mothers. And I said, oh, go to aid to dependent mothers. And then I would get a check every month and it would be reliable, or stay at the job, straight commission. I'm 20 years old, right? 21 maybe, just turned 21. Stay at the job, straight commission, where you can get $350 every time you place someone. In that moment, responsibility was born. I chose to live my life responsible. And I knew I was in a company. All these other women were making so much money. If they could do it, I could do it. Or go stand in line and wait for someone else to take care of me. And I chose myself. I chose responsibility. I chose David. And I started a 25-year career in recruiting. And every year I earned more than the last year. This isn't about the earnings. I was supporting people in being fulfilled in their life, in their job. It was noble work, right? So I not only was making great money, I could support my kid, I was doing noble work, and my career soared. I became one in the top 3% of the nation. I was in a group, inducted into a group called the Pinnacle Society. I didn't know I was a top producer because I was just in the zone, but I became one. And I moved myself from friction to flow without even knowing what I was doing. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's what really being liberated at work is all about. It's about moving from friction to flow, having agency, autonomy, and authority over your life. Let's face it. Some days you feel like that. Some days you feel super like, I'm hot, I can do this. And other days you feel like, I'm not, I can't. And it's all about how aware we are of our own subconscious programming, of our own inherited conversations from our Italian immigrant parents, Catholic mother. You stay married no matter what, because love is a lifelong thing. And if you get divorced, even if he is a heroin addict and he beats you and your children, but if you get divorced, you're going to go to hell. That's subconscious programming. That's a history. And the Italian is inherited conversation. We stay married. Italian, Sicilian inherited conversation. Men hit their wives. I know some of you might be getting upset about that, but in the old days, in the old country, that's what was going on, in more times than not. Maybe not beating, but hitting. So, the woman thinks, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Her father, my grandpa was awesome, but he hit his kids with the belt. So my mother thought, her subconscious programming, oh, being hit is just part of life. It's not. I'm here to tell you it's not. You got to rewrite your programming. So how you move from friction to flow is, first you realize, I have got inherited conversations. I've got, when I was raised in my life, my Erickson's 8 stages of development. There's 8 points in our life that our personality gets created. And then from there, we create our personal reality. And we see the world through that lens. And then there's also epigenetics. We get thoughts, feelings, beliefs, moods, behaviors, a persona, personality, our ego, from the epigenetics, and that's the long range conditioning of the people who had us and the people who had them and the people who had them and the people who had them. So often we have programming in our neural pathways that has us see the world in a certain way, has us view the world in a certain way, has us have biases for or against things. Oh, she's too aggressive. She's mean. Oh, he's too passive. He doesn't get anything done. We have a way of looking out at the world, and then we judge other people. And then we bring that to the workplace with us. And this causes interpersonal conflicts at work. So for me to do the kind of work that I do, which is now I go into companies and I move them from friction to flow for the last 15 years, I've got to always be sharpening my saw, always be ahead of the game. And here's a really good story about why. A woman goes to Gandhi. Y'all know Mahatma Gandhi. Well, maybe you don't, but you can Google him or ask ChatGPT. Mahatma Gandhi was a peacemaker in India when they were breaking away from English ownership, domination. And so you could say that India and England were in a state of friction. And Gandhi turned it to a state of flow because he made the commitment. He had the vision, and he said, they will leave here peacefully and as friends. And how he went about it is he conditioned his mind, his body, and his spirit to stand the ground and to do any kind of work that makes a shift in people, even in your own self, to go from friction to flow. You have to always be one step ahead. So whether you're conditioning by climbing the top of a mountain in Bali, or you're conditioning by meditating, or you're conditioning by going on cleanses or taking a lot of classes, you have to condition your mind, body, and spirit to be someone who can move from friction to flow. And that's another thing we're going to be talking about on this podcast and many subsequent podcasts. So putting yourself in the position where you're always in the stretch zone, because the reason you need to have your brain needs to be agile enough, neuroplasticity enough movement in it to retrain the brain. So in order for your brain to be that way, you have to get out of your normal patterns. And to get out of your normal patterns, you do things you've never done before. Like in this case, I climbed a 9,900-foot mountain. And when I did that, I was in a state of friction. I had moved to Silicon Valley. I wanted to start a software company on how to hire people consciously. It was a great product. I'm sure I'll share about it in a different podcast. But it fell apart. And before I knew it, the partner that I had picked wanted to disintermediate the human out of human resources. And if you get to know me and you understand my background and you participate in this podcast, you'll see that like disintermediating the human is not at all what I'm for. At all. I'm for liberating the human spirit so people can work and love and live in a state of flow. And so I had to break up with that guy in the process, lost a lot of relationships, lost almost $1 million. I had to go collect unemployment. I was in a state of friction. Somebody that is coaching me said, you need to get away from it all, disconnect. And so I went to Bali. And in the process of going to Bali, I did the biggest physical challenge I could do. And in the process of doing that, I realized that I could have the business I wanted right then and there. I could be liberating the human spirit without starting a software company, without having all the proceeds from that. I could just declare that I was going to do it and it would happen, and it happened. I wrote one article in that state of flow, in that state of courage. That article got picked up by a national publication. I don't know how many people read it, but one guy that was on his way out, an exiting executive who'd been with the company 25 years, gave it to the new general manager who was really causing a lot of friction. And he said, you need to hire this woman. You need to fix this or you're going to get fired. And I got an email and he said, I read your article and I'm doing everything wrong that you talk about. And that client became $1 million client for my company. And that was the beginning of 14 years of, actually 11 years, but I was already doing some work before then, but 11 years of doing good work, great work in organizations, moving people from friction to flow. Many people that have been in the room with us in our deep alignments say that we're doing God's work. Now, you might not like that because you might be Bill Nye the Science Guy and say there is no God, but good work, really good work for social good in the hearts and minds of people so they can actually like who they work with. That's what moving from friction to flow is all about.